If you were here for session 1, welcome back. If you just came in for session 2, welcome to our first ever Hungry for History Student Showcase. We're hoping to do this every year moving forward. I'm Luchon Spraker with the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives, and the Student Showcase is an opportunity for us to invite some of our local college students to come in and present their Savannah and Georgia related history topics and research they've been working on, and get some experience in sort of a mini conference setting, public speaking and presentation skills, and for us to have some great presentations for our Hungry for History series. So win-win for both of us. I have 3 great speakers lined up for our session 2 panel. Before I introduce them, I would ask you, if you have a cell phone on you, to please mute it or turn it off. We don't have a sound system in this room, so we have some seats on the 2 front rows. So if you want to move forward, please take a moment now, and I'll remind my speakers to try to project. If you are having trouble hearing, give us a little wave during the things to remind us to speak up. Can't close the door because it locks automatically from the outside, so we do have a little bit of ambient noise in the background. We do have 4 seats up front if you want to come sit closer. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. They're each going to have about 15 minutes to talk. I'm going to ask you to hold all of your questions and comments to the end. We'll have time for you to ask questions of all of the speakers at the end. So today, first, we're going to hear from April Moore. She is a student at Savannah College of Art and Design in Art History. Her presentation will be Liberty Ships in Savannah and How They Won the War. Then we're going to hear from Dana McCammon. Did I pronounce that right? McCammon, with Georgia Southern University studying anthropology. Her presentation is Feeding the Foundations, Faunal Analysis from the Fort Pulaski Construction Village. And our final presenter is Savannah Mae Tuten with Savannah College of Art and Design studying preservation design. Her presentation is Visionary Art Environments, the Legacy of Laura Pope. So with that, I will invite April to come forward.
Thank you. I'm going to be talking to you about Savannah and Liberty Ships, both of their integral wars that they had in World War II. For starters, I would like to answer the question of what is a Liberty Ship? A Liberty Ship is a cargo ship that was built during World War II, specifically for use getting supplies to the Allied forces fighting in the war all the way across the world in Europe. These ships were built very quickly, and they were not intended to last a long time. There was a report from the U.S. House Appropriations Committee made in late January of 1941, which describes them as a, quote, 5-year vessel. Liberty ships are unique for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because these ships were not created out of a need during the war. Instead, the method of building them and the blueprints necessary to build them came to the U.S. from England prior to the U.S. involvement in World War II. So that means that they were a preparation for involvement in the war, not a reaction to the U.S. involvement. Additionally, the production method of these vessels was far different from the standard construction of ships at the time. Liberties were built piece by piece, and then they were welded together to secure their construction. So that means that one section of the ship was built, and then another section was built. They were put together and kind of just glued together by welding, much like how you build with Legos today, where you take one piece and another piece and click them together. That's how the production was done. And if you were a worker at one of the shipyards building one of these ships, you would be in charge of one very specific part of this process. You would be trained to do that very well, and you would repeat that until your shift was over. You would go back the next day and do that same process over and over again. That meant that this method of production was very efficient and fast, and the shipyard here in Savannah worked at a pace of completing about 1 ship per week. The fastest Liberty ship built on record in the United States was built in a total of 4 days and 12 hours at a shipyard in Virginia. They were very large, slightly over 441 feet long and 57 feet wide, which measures to over the length of a football field in width and over 11 football fields in length from front to back. They used a 2,500 power steam engine to push them through the water at 11 knots, which translates to approximately 12.5 miles per hour. These ships had a range of 17,000 miles on a single tank of fuel and contained 5 cargo holds. Each of these Liberties carried 9,141 tons of cargo on a full load of fuel. To put that in a visual, that means that the holds in the ship had space to hold 2,840 Jeeps, or 440 light tanks, 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition, or 3.4 million C rations, which were the canned military rations at the time for the soldiers. These ships were not built to be pretty or overly fast. They were instead built to be sturdy and large enough to carry as much supplies as possible in one trip. President at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, is quoted when looking at the plans as stating they are a, quote, dreadful looking object, and gave them the nickname which followed them through the war and to modern times by saying, I think these ships will do us very well. She'll carry a good load. She isn't much to look at though, is she? A real ugly duckling. That name has followed them until now. And now specifically, Savannah's role in World War II with these Liberty ships. As I said, Liberty ships were built throughout World War II at shipyards all across America, and 2 of these shipyards were located in Georgia. There was J.A. Jones in Brunswick, and Southeastern Shipyards, pictured right here, was local to Savannah. Located just outside of downtown Savannah, in the area near the Savannah Golf Club, on what is now the Truman Parkway, right near the East President Street extension. They built 88 Liberty ships in total and employed a complete total of 46,766 workers over their years of operation between 1941 and August of 1945, so just about 3 years of operation. This resulted in a total of $112 million paid out in payroll to the workers over that time, which has a value today of over $2 billion. These shipyards brought coastal Georgia out of the Great Depression, as you can imagine with those numbers I just said, with Southeastern employing as much as 15,000 workers at once in their busiest time in 1943. There were people of all backgrounds working at the shipyard in Savannah. There were former school teachers and principals, anyone who could not enlist in the armed services due to age, disability, visual, any of that. Women also worked at the shipyards as well. Notably in Savannah, there were a couple really special previous careers, such as the leader of a 15-piece band that was disbanded due to enlistments. There was a fullback for the Chicago Bears, a professional baseball player, the star quarterback for the University of Georgia from the mid-30s, a successful heavyweight boxer, and even Emma Kelly, the famed lady of 6,000 songs, worked at Southeastern prior to her fame. As you might be able to guess from those previous careers I've listed, that most of the people working at these shipyards were not previously trained in shipbuilding, welding, or any of the manual labor that went with building one of these ships. They also came from all across the country to work, not just locally in Georgia or local to Savannah. They came from Texas, other places, in order to escape the effects from the Depression. As a result, there were entire communities built by Southeastern in order to house the men and women working here, as well as schools to teach the workers how to do their jobs. So if you moved here and you were a former school teacher, you could go to welding school, learn how to weld, and then that would be your job there at the shipyard. Specifically, the Pine Gardens area off of East President Street near the golf club is the last remnants of one of these shipyard communities that were built in Savannah. If you go there today, there's a small plaque that was placed in recent years to note the historic significance of this area. All of the public housing units built in Savannah were temporary by design, constructed specifically for the shipbuilders, and they were intended to be torn down after the war. So much like the Liberty ships the workers built, the houses they too lived in were intended only to exist during the use of the war. There were actually so many people that came to Savannah that a lot of people couldn't even find a place to rent, and so they just rented a bed for 8 hours to sleep in before they went back to work. There are others that lived in various areas of downtown, renting a room from a family who decided they wanted to participate in the war effort by putting up a shipyard worker, or they lived with others who worked at the shipyards. As I said, women worked at these shipyards. They were indeed the backbone of these shipyards, and they worked alongside the men doing the same hard work for the same 8 hours a day or more. You can see on the left that those are the Liberty ship workers at J.I. Jones, and then over on the other side, a welding crew from Southeastern. You can notice there are quite a few women in that photo. Though at the start of Southeastern's career, there were not as many women working on ships. The numbers grew as the years went by. They hired a small number of workers at the beginning, and a few actually worked on the very first ship Southeastern produced, which was the Oglethorpe. But unfortunately, their numbers did not increase much until 1943. But in the first 6 months of 1943, the monthly average percentage of women working at the shipyard reached 9.3% of the total worker population. This then rose to 13.8% in the final 6 months of 1943. And during that time, 2,000 women were helping to build ships in Savannah. Women were surprisingly actually paid the same wages as men at Southeastern, which was unfortunately not a standard across the US at these shipyards and was indeed a rarity at the time. Pay at Southeastern started at 56 cents an hour when you started out, and it went up to $1.20 once you were more of an expert at your job. This translates to starting at $10.06 an hour in today's money, all the way up to $21.51 an hour. The women hired at Southeastern did their jobs well and with pride, though at first most were hired to work in more traditional roles such as the receptionist, secretary, clerk, telephone operator, and chauffeur. Notably, all 13 of the executive chauffeurs at the shipyard were women, though they were very quickly hired and trained to be welders, ship fitters, crane operators, burners, and pipe fitters. Virtually any job that needed to be done here in order to build a ship. Officials around the country believed that the greater patience of women made them much better for welding than men. And management at Southeastern also found that women could not only be trained more quickly, but that they would also do a better job than men at the installations of the complicated electrical components that required delicate fingerwork. Men working at the shipyard also discovered the talents that these women possessed. A welder, M.C. Nettles, worked with many women and reported that there was one good thing about a woman. If you tell her to do something, she'd do it. Everything was freehand. A woman is a lot steadier than a man and could make a prettier cut. Unfortunately, even with the high praise given by anybody who worked with these women, when the war ended and the shipyards were starting to close down, the women were the very first of the workers to be let go. But there were some gains through this, as many of them were able to save part of their salaries to then help their families buy a house or to provide a higher standard of living for their families after the war. Additionally, this taught women that they could hold, quote, serious jobs. They could work in a world that was formerly for men only, and they could do a job just as well as a man could. They could make home repairs, drive and maintain a car, and balance a checkbook, all without the help of a man. As we all know, things did not change right away, but the seed was planted, and the role of women in the war effort was invaluable. A shipyard official stated that America's wartime achievements in shipbuilding could not have been realized without women workers. Now, life in Savannah as a shipyard worker, we can see some of the workers pictured there at a war loan drive. If you worked at Southeastern in Savannah during the war, you would be assigned to one of 3 shifts. Each lasted 8 hours, though at times when there was a need, workers would work more than one shift. So that would mean that you're working 2 8-hour shifts back to back, 16 hours in total. Though the work at the shipyard was hard and long, there were many facilities provided for the workers. Southeastern provided a company cafeteria for use during lunch and supper breaks in order to deal with any injuries. They also had 3 doctors and 18 nurses on staff. There were also firemen on duty due to the frequent blazes that occurred with the welding sparks. And if you had the time amidst all this work, you could even participate in a company band, one of 2 orchestras, a baseball team, boxing, or a men's or women's basketball team, or even a golf team. They also provided a small daycare called Tuten Children's Center, which had approximately 36 children of the workers enrolled. Children under the age of 5 there were given breakfast, lunch, and snacks. The company also sponsored a bi-weekly publication entitled The Southeaster. This was a 20-page newsletter that contained articles about absenteeism, sports, ship launchings, poems and songs, news and information, wedding and birth announcements, and noted about outstanding workers. These were small entertainment and break opportunities that served to keep morale high during a very busy wartime struggle, and offered some small fun for these people who were working, doing very hard labor every day building these ships. As I said, the very first ship to be built at Southeastern was the Oglethorpe. This, unfortunately, was also the very first Savannah-built ship to be lost in the war. The Oglethorpe was christened and launched on November 20th, 1942, as you can see right here, to the great fanfare and excitement of the entire city of Savannah. Workers at Southeastern watched the ship slide into the water and go on its way with pride before then returning to the job at hand to create more ships. Unfortunately, the life of the Oglethorpe was far shorter than anyone had expected. On the evening of March 16, 1943, the convoy the Oglethorpe was traveling with was ambushed by German submarines. At 9:30 p.m. convoy time, the first torpedo hit. This was one of the first torpedo strikes that the ship would take on in a span of less than 10 hours. Though she was hit many times over the course of the battle, the ship stubbornly refused to sink until 12 p.m. convoy time, the same time that here in Savannah, our celebration of the St. Patrick's Day Mass began. This battle came to be known as the Battle of St. Patrick's Day, and it claimed the lives of all 30 or more crew members who boarded the first Savannah ship to be created and launched in this war. Now, what happened to all of these ships? There were, unfortunately, a good number of Liberty ships lost in the war, either the way that the Oglethorpe went or through just disregard and repairs, or unfortunately just beached. The rest of the remaining ships either continued on as a cargo ship for as long as they could. This is namely for the ones that were made in the later years of the war that were still relatively new. Or they were even sold or gifted to other countries for use, or they were scrapped so that the metal and engines the ship contained could be used elsewhere. For the ships that remained intact and in use in the years following, there was an act in the 1970s passed called the Liberty Ship Act, which made the remaining Liberty ships available to states for use as an artificial reef. There were actually 2 sunk right here off the Georgia coast that were actually built right here in Savannah. There was the Addie Bagley Daniels, which was sunk off of St. Catherine's Island, and the Edwin S. Nettleton, sunk off of St. Simon's Island off the coast in Brunswick. And these are sites that divers today still visit to marvel at these ships that helped us win the war. There are unfortunately only 2 Liberty ships still in existence today of the over 2,710 Liberty ships built in America between 1941 and 1945. These 2 ships remain intact and preserved as floating museums. They are the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco. This is very small compared to the number of ships built, but again, they were not meant to last and they were not expected to have this long of a lifespan. Regardless of their lifespan, Liberty ships became a vital part of the war, and without them, it is likely that we never would have won the war, or that it would have continued on to be a far longer battle. It is important to remember that this victory could not have been achieved without the men and women working diligently to make these ships everywhere across the country. I hope that you've learned something new through this, and I thank you all for your time and attention.
So good afternoon, thank you so much for joining me here. As you know, my name is Dana and I am a master's student at Georgia Southern, but I'm also a ranger out at Fort Pulaski, so getting to do my thesis on Fort Pulaski is kind of a dream come true. So the analysis that contributed to this presentation is still ongoing, but I'm hoping I'll have all the answers soon. So welcome to Feeding the Foundations. I have a quick disclaimer before I really get started. As you noticed from the title slide, there are going to be skeletal animal remains, pig and cow, but not human. There are no humans involved in the scope of this research. So Fort Pulaski is one of my favorite things to talk about. My tours for my friends and family consistently last over an hour or 2.5, as my mom patiently reminds me. So keeping this story short so I can get to the meat of my topic is a little difficult, but fortunately there's a script. I'm going to be good. So, after the War of 1812, Congress approved the establishment of the third system of coastal defense. Fort Pulaski is just one of 42 coastal fortifications built between the years of 1815 and 1867 that were intended to protect the nation's ports and shipping channels. Cockspur Island is just 12 miles downriver from Savannah and 3 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. In the Civil War, it was first claimed by the Georgia militia and then turned over to the Confederate Army, where it then was the site of a pivotal battle in the Civil War that really proved two things. One, that rifled artillery was a game changer in warfare technology, and two, brick masonry fortifications like Fort Pulaski are no longer relevant. Fortunately, that doesn't actually matter for this presentation. So, the construction village. Well, the construction of Fort Pulaski lasted for about 19 years, from 1829 to 1847. If you're going to build a 25 million brick fortification, you're going to need some workers, and it's way more convenient to keep your workers on the island and build them a place to live, rather than bringing them in and out every single day. So we have decades of people that are staying in this village between 1829 and actually 1881, until it was demolished by a hurricane. The people who would have been living on the island during the construction would have been our officers, our boatmen, our mechanics, and our laborers. Our officers would have included the Corps of Engineer officers that were in charge of supervising the construction and the workers. Namely, we have Lieutenant Joseph King Fenno Mansfield, who eventually became captain and ultimately major general, and he was assigned, the second person assigned to actually supervise the construction. Major Babcock was our first, and we have to give an honorable mention to Second Lieutenant Robert E. Lee, fresh from West Point, who actually was a chief engineer on designing the ditch and dike system that holds the island together still today. Now the boatmen, we know they were there. There were 6 of them, and obviously they handled boat stuff, supplies, people, communications from the city, and that's all we know about them. Fortunately, we're here to talk about the other 2 groups, the mechanics, who fulfilled skilled labor roles such as our blacksmiths, our carpenters, and our masons. Now, they were typically, not always, hired men who came from the north. They were hired white men. And they could have been German, Irish descent, based on research so far that our archaeologists did for the overall report on the workers' village. Now, the laborers, they fulfilled the less skilled roles of, actually building the fort, laying those bricks, right? And so they were actually enslaved people who had been rented from nearby rice plantations. This was a common practice at the time as a source of affordable labor. And so they would have been from West Africa, maybe the Senegambian region, also known as the Rice Coast. And that is important, I promise. I wanted to say this is our This is the Pensacola Naval Yard, this is Fort Jefferson, and this is my very own Fort Pulaski. Now, here's a quick layout of the village. The laborers area is over here. This is the Savannah River, the North Channel. Here's our officers area. They would have been living in the same spot because not only would the laborers be readily available to accept shipments from those ships, but they were under constant surveillance from the officers. The mechanics, on the other hand, were actually very close to the fort that they were building because they were a little less likely to run away. So here's a gratuitous photo because I love taking pictures. If you were standing at the mechanics boarding house, this is about what your view of Fort Pulaski would look like. Now, in 2022 and 2023, National Park Service archaeologists Laura Seifert and Savannah-area started excavating units in search of these structures associated with the mechanics and the laborers. Also, intern Tori Long also contributed to this. So they, in the process of 21 excavation units, uncovered parts of the laborers' quarters, the mechanics' quarters, and part of the kitchen unit for the mechanics' boarding house. So in the bricks and the ceramics and the glassware, they found some animal bones, and that is actually where I come in. I am studying a specific field of archaeology called zooarchaeology, and as a zooarchaeologist, I have the pleasure of analyzing animal remains recovered from archaeological sites and studying them to determine how they interact with humans, whether for work, leisure, or food. The primary questions in my study are pretty basic. What were they eating? Where were they getting their food from? And what kind of cultural traces did they leave for me on these bones? So these are two more of my favorite things to talk about, bones and food, but I'll keep it within reason. Now, we don't have the benefit of hundreds of Instagram posts to tell us about the daily lives and meals of the occupants of Oxford Island. We have to do a little more legwork, and I say we, but actually I have to thank Laura and Sam. I have to thank Georgia Southern's Dr. Julie DeChantel, Heidi Moy, and Dr. Anastasia Sims, because they have performed an exhaustive crawl through these 19th century newspapers and records, including those of Lieutenant Mansfield. He had what some might consider to be meticulous journals of supply orders and inventories, but when it comes to the food and the rations for the men building the fort, he leaves us a little bit wanting, a little bit hungry, if you will. 5,600 pounds of rice, supplies for the bakehouse, and subsistence rations are about all we find in these records, and that is really hard to stretch across 19 years and hundreds of men, thousands of men, really. So what else was there? Those pictures that we saw earlier, Fort Jefferson and the Naval Yard of Pensacola, they also engaged in that practice. The Corps of Engineers engaged in that practice of renting enslaved people in the area for, again, affordable labor. Common, controversial, but it did happen. We know also that the Army and the U.S. Corps of Engineers would provide rations for the soldiers and the contracted workers under their employ. So the daily rations would have included things like, beans, molasses, and a pound of beef or pork that would have probably been salted. So I have, thus far at Fort Pulaski, identified both pork and beef, as well as chicken in this assemblage. And so we also have some wild taxi, which is exciting. Before we get to that, the nationalities for the workers is important because food is a significant part of our culture. And the bones can tell us a lot about what kind of foods were being prepared and how. So with over 100 men to feed, the economic answer here is to make a meal where the meat can be maximized by cooking it with the grains and the legumes. If you've ever had Hoppin' John, your rice, your black-eyed peas, your bacon. If you've ever had Irish coddle, which is like potatoes and barley and whatever meat you had left over from the week, throw it all in a pot. These are meals that you can put in a pot, stick it in the fire in the morning, and go off and work for the rest of the day, and dinner is going to be ready for you when you get home. But some of the archaeological sites that we found with German groups at that time are a little different. You find a meat and three style of cooking where they have their individual meat portions and 3 sides. But I want to know, is this something that they were able to keep doing during their occupation on Coxper Island? Now, The construction of the naval yard resulted in advertisements that solicited meat from town so they could feed the workers. We don't have any ads like that in Savannah for Fort Pulaski, so I'm a little comfortable assuming that they were sourcing at least some of their meat somewhere else. I want to talk about the Mississippi River for just a second, just travel just a little bit with me. In 1837, there's the Army steamboat, the USS Heroine, that sank, and on board were these 3 barrels of salt pork for the soldiers that they were headed to. Now, there were contracts that they recovered also associated with the salt pork, and they called for higher grades of meat. So specifically, no snouts, no ears, no lower legs or foot bones, but everything else was fine. So hypothetically, you would have pigs of a certain size. It would be 1 pig per barrel. In these barrels, there was a little bit more, just to make that weight grade, but they stuck with the stipulations of the contract. They had, vertebra, the cranial elements that are not associated with the snout, pelvic pieces, humeri, all the good stuff, but no foot bones, which is great. However, at Fort Pulaski in the village, I don't think they were receiving these same contracts or grades of pork because I have identified teeth, I have identified tusks, and I've identified foot bones. So none of those would actually apply to those constraints in the contracts found on the USS Heroine, if we can assume an equivalence to the Army and the US Army Corps of Engineers. Now, at the Civil War, we have plenty of instances where live cattle are documented as present, be it the sickly ordnance sergeant, whose cow allegedly inflicted significant damage on the island in the ditch and dike system. But we also have the fresh, grass-fed beef that kept the soldiers busy during peacetime, especially when they're escaping off to tidy. But what kind of evidence do we have towards a similar practice during construction? The identified pieces in my assemblage of Vostorus, which is cow, have been pretty typical. We have the postcranial cuts that align fairly well with Hale's butchering standards of 1838. For instance, these 2 scapulae right here would have come from the clod cut, which we now call a chuck, or chuck roast. This is personally one of my favorite cuts because it goes a long way. Low and slow, I get to show off my flavor mastery. It's fantastic. It's great for feeding a crowd. And it's also one of those very muscular, heavy use muscles that needs that low and slow, right? So we'll get back to this in a little bit. I didn't include a picture because I actually only have 15 minutes. But these 2 scapula are wildly different in size and shape, so we have a couple of different breeds of cow, and I just think that's cool. That's all. So this is an interesting cut that I'm still trying to learn a little bit more about. This is the left mandible of a cow that features what we're calling abrasions on the lateral side or the side that's against your cheek. Some of the scrapes look like they could be from a saw. Some are more random and more closely resemble knife cuts. Scraping off the cheek meat is the most likely answer to some of these marks, but what I'm interested in is this right here is a saw cut between the 3rd and the 2nd molars. I gotta look up I still need to find a military butchering guide for that time for salt beef butchering, but if I can prove it, that may be how those barrels of salt pork adhere to that contract of no snout, but we still find those cranial elements. Now, I would be remiss to leave out the animal that would have been found on just about every coastal plantation at the time, whether it be plantation owners or the people working for them, enslaved or otherwise. Chickens are easy enough to keep, and as we all know, they're great for daily proteins. A few years past construction, 1850, we had a work supervisor whose name is Willard Colburn, and he wrote a letter to his brother extolling the entertainment and exercise value of his garden and poultry yard. He's not the only one eating chickens on this island, though, because I found a small amount of chicken bones, and Laura and Sam have identified some eggshell. So we're pretty sure we've got some live chickens during construction. Now, one of my favorite things to learn about 19th century life on a coastal island is all the alternate food sources that residents would take advantage of. We have an abundance of plantation archaeology that's not at Cockspur Island, demonstrating that residents of each social class on these islands would take advantage of some of the wild species surrounding them. What I found so far on Cockspur Island doesn't quite measure up proportionally, but again, still early, and it's still really cool to see these taxes specifically in the assemblage for the mechanics quarters So we know that those men had a little bit of time and agency to go fishing, hunting, or just trapping these native species. In conclusion, what I've identified so far has led me to believe that soups and stews or other one-pot meals were probably a significant portion of the food served around this time. We have a good chance of live pigs and chickens being present and butchered on site, but the limited evidence for cows being brought in, perhaps as salt beef, can't be ignored. So as this study continues, I'll be paying close attention to the beautiful saw marks, where on the body these cuts are being made, and any signs of different tools being used. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've had a wonderful Friday, and I will do my best to make sure we get out on time today. So, once again, my name is Savannah May, and I'm an MFA student at SCAD in Preservation Design, and my topic will be about visionary art environments, specifically the legacy of Laura Polk. And this is the property I will be talking about. So, let's define what a visionary art environment is. It is a property that has expanded beyond the physical structure or environment and has become a living art piece based off of the artistic values of the artist who creates that. Now, in simple terms, it means the building, the gardens, the outhouses, the sculptures they may build on the property, the art pieces they put into the building have become one artistic piece in the whole, which has led to complications in preserving these pieces because it's not as simple as, oh, if a building, a wall starts to rot, I need to get it from this specific red oak tree to be in compliance, because what if that wall had a painting on it? Because you can't replace the painting, because for most of these structures, the artist is dead. So you can't recreate it, so how are you going to preserve the building when the building is an art piece? Because keeping those in line with practices, preserving it has two different set of rules. So you have to find a balance to preserving the site while also preserving the artwork. So, what are examples of successful visionary art environments? The ones that are successful are ones that have internal income to support the maintenance of the property and the artwork. They have financial support, either through being part of societies, charities, and getting donors to support the areas. It's also marketing and promotion, because you have to get people to come to your property. So you have to be able to get into those heritage trails. You want to encourage people from hour or 2-hour drives to be like, hey kids, let's get in the car and we're going to go take a day trip to this property to go explore things. And you have to preserve the story, because 9 times out of 10, they might not be coming for the building, they may not be coming from the art. They want to hear the story. What makes this artist special? Why are we interested in them, and why does the story need to be preserved? So, one example is a place called Pasquana. Now, the artist is called E-O-M, all capital letters. He was an artist who went to New York, who got sick. We're not sure what he got sick with, other than he had a fever of over 102 and had an hallucinated episode in which he states God came down to him and told him to start his own religion. So, after he recovered from his illness, he came back to Georgia, and he started this place. And this place is a 7-acre art environment. It has multiple buildings, and he built it in the style of pre-Columbian, African, Native American, and other Eastern cultures, and he influenced all of that in his art. And currently it is in a stewardship with Columbus State University, and that is their primary source of income. And through the university, they get fellowships, they get internships, they have annual concerts, annual poetry readings. It's sort of like Woodstock year-round. So that is how they've managed to survive. Another example is the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens. So this one's a fun example because she was not just a sculptor, she was not just a painter, she was an arborist. So it's 2 acres with over 250 certified plants and over 100 pieces of artwork, including sculptures and paintings. And she made the plant work her medium, like others would use painting or watercolor or concrete. Plants was her medium. So it's a lovely example of not to limit yourself with the type of artwork you're going to define. The property itself is the artwork. So this one gets a lot of funding through environmental groups because they're like, oh, we need to preserve all these unique plant life that's in Florida. So this has found a way to sustain itself not just through the artwork and the museum on the property, but from the plants itself. So my property, which is called the Pope Museum, it's in Cairo, Georgia, which is about an hour away from Tallahassee. So this one is in a transitional phase. Currently, it is not sustainable, but there are ways to make it sustainable. It was abandoned after Laura Pope died, so it used to be a huge acreage and, relatives claimed parts of it, other parts were sold off, and the main house went into terrible disrepair. It was a drug house at one point in time, so you can imagine the damage that was come to it, and it was going to be condemned until the new owner, Michelle, she and her family were from Tallahassee. The husband was on the police force, he was injured, so they wanted to find a new way to be a family, find a new income, so they brought this property to restore it. So she spent the last 4 to 5 years restoring the place. So it can be a successful one, but it's in that transitional phase of we got the building where it needs to be shown, but now we need to bring people into it. So on the property, this is the original house. This is what I like to call the modern add-on, so your bathrooms, your kitchens, your laundry rooms, things before electrical and plumbing were common in houses. This is her Red Cross statue. This is her statue dedicated to World War II. And this right here is part of their way to drum up income. It is essentially an Airbnb that you can stay on the property. And back here, they hold events, poetries, meetings, weddings. All right, so as I said before, this is the Red Cross statue. Now this statue is very unique because this is the oldest statue ever dedicated to the women of the Red Cross. So she started building this after World War II. World War I, big bit. And it was finished around 1920. We don't have exact dates for all this because she spent years working on these statues. And she was very upset that at the time we had statues dedicated to all of our veterans who went out, fought in the wars, and dealt with all of that trauma that comes with all of that so we can have a peaceful life. And she was angry that over 20,000 Red Cross workers didn't get any recognition for the suffering and the hardship they went through. So she dedicated this to them. It, like I said, is the oldest statue in history dedicated to the Red Cross women. And the writing, unfortunately, like I said, because this was a drug house, a lot of the writing on her statues have fallen away, so you can't fully read it. But from what we were able to determine, it has a thank you message to the women of the Red Cross, and it also has the names of the local women in her area who were part of the Red Cross. And the unique thing about her is that she's a self-taught artist. So she handmade all her concrete. She didn't use tools. You'll see it in later pictures, but if you can go up and see really close, you can see her fingerprints. We have all her fingerprints on file because it's in the concrete itself. It is part of the texture. Yeah. Another one of her first older pieces is this lovely framing. So it's part of the front porch. It's also part of the second porch on the second floor. And these are actually sewing machines. So back then, let's face it, women weren't allowed to vote. She grew up in an era where women were considered property of their fathers and husbands. And if they even worked outside the house, it was in sewing factories or being seamstress. And they weren't even allowed to claim their own paychecks. They either went to their father or husband. She was unique because she was the first woman in her area to actually have paychecks written out to her name. She actually owned the property. She even started several committees in her area, including the electrical committee, which is very rare for a woman in this time period. So she took a bunch of sewing machines, she plastered in her homemade plaster, homemade concrete, and she changed it to be part of the artwork in her house. And she stated the reason she did this is because she wanted to make a point that women can do other things than what we think they can do. You can take a seamstress and evolve it into something else. Women can do other things. We can evolve beyond what society tells us we can do. And then the biggest piece she did that's currently on the property, unfortunately, out of many of the statues she built, they were either destroyed or they were sold, or they're on other properties that the owners say, you can have it back if you pay us like 50 grand for it. So this is one of her biggest ones. This is dedicated to the people who served in World War II. She was very big on honoring our veterans. Now, I'd like, going back to this point again, was a drug house. Part of the statues are damaged. So we don't know exactly who every person was, what every quote says. We can make inferences. Women soldiers, the vice president at the time, the attorney general, other people in the military and people who served, who these statues were based off of. See, the top is on the left side, the bottom is on the right. So the quotes you can read, they're all Bible quotes about serving the Lord, forgiveness, love, being there for your family, supporting the struggles of other people. There are also partial quotes, or like we said, the attorney generals, the vice president at the time, but we don't have the full quotes because, like I said, the writing has degraded over time. So here's some close-ups. Like I said earlier, you can see the way she did this all by hand. You can see the way the texture breaks, how she layers the clothes and everything. I mean, it's amazing. Most people go to school to learn how to do this now, and she just did it by trial and error. And as I said, you can see it better in these, like the fingerprints, especially in the roses where she gripped it in and did everything. All right, so that is design. So the key takeaways from this is, how can we make this in transition property successful? They have established trusts, they've established charities, and they established places for internal income. But because of where it's located in Cairo, Georgia, they need to do more. It's not like being in a major city or a major tourist attraction where you can just go, oh, another property here, we can add it onto our list. There has to be more of an effort. So they have the internal income. So they need to add more into heritage tourism. There's a couple heritage trails, which if you don't know what that is, it's not like a walking trail. It's essentially a path someone can take to visit different historical sites on the way, and they call it a trail. So there's a couple trails around this property that if you can manage to get part up, that brings people in. Marketing and promotion, marketing on websites, being part of trusts and societies, locally, state, or nationally will help build up income. Because the biggest thing this property has is the storytelling. This is a woman who defied what society said she could do in her era. She owned her own house. She turned her property into a living art piece where that's something that really wasn't done for women in that era. And she's an incredible woman. She lived through World War I, World War II, several different diseases. Like, she has a story that's amazing that a lot of people would come to see. So it's just getting out there and telling people, hey, come visit us. We're in a beautiful rural part of Georgia with a very beautiful property with a very beautiful story. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much to all our speakers, and I would now like to, and we have a great bibliography that Savannah May has, so if anybody likes that, we can make that available. So any questions for any of the speakers now or comments? Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Please tell me again where the shipyard was. I want to visualize.
Yeah, so it was located just outside of downtown Savannah. You know where the Savannah Golf Club currently is?
Right.
It was over near that area, near the East President Street extension of the Harry Truman Parkway.
Okay.
So right over in that area.
Do you know how far west it went back towards town?
I do not know how far west it went back, no.
Ms. Pat?
Oh, okay. Ms. Moore, again. Okay, I was interested in all of your presentations, very good. But for you, in doing your research of the communities which surrounded the shipyard, such as Pine Gardens, did you by any chance come across anything mentioning the workers at the LePageville community, right on the other side of Pine Gardens?
I did not. I unfortunately was not able to find as much research on the communities as I would have liked to, as it's such a broad topic. I was trying to, it was very hard narrowing down what I wanted to talk about and what I wanted to focus research on. Unfortunately, I was unable to find a lot of information on that. The book that I have was very comprehensive, and I tried to find the sources that author used, but those were very hard to come by, and unfortunately that author passed a couple years ago, so I was unable to reach out to them for contact of how to find the sources.
So, if you found something on Pine Gardens, Miss Patricia Lennox Jenkins is really a good resource on the communities on the east side. She's donated materials to Historical Society, but she's also on the board of directors of the Pageville, along with me, and she's a great resource of information on the Liberty ships. So another community built especially for the workers at the railroad, but then when the Liberty ships came along, those African American workers also walked from the Pageville to the docks to the Liberty ships, and their jobs totally differed from those that the whites were allowed to have, but they also worked on the Liberty ships. Just wanted to point that out.
I have a question for Savannah May. When did Laura Pope die?
The 1950s, I want to say it was 55 or 56 off the top of my memory. But her entire bio, because if I just went through her bio, we would be here for 35 minutes. Michelle, who owns the site, she did a very comprehensive timeline on the website, which is just the Pope Museum. So if you are interested more in her story, there's a very lovely bullet point, like this happened here, this happened there, and everything she went through.
Yep. I had a question for you also. So her archival records, the documents that related to Laura Pope's life, they are in the museum on the site of the property rather than with an academic institution or something else?
Yes, ma'am. So it is on the National Registrar, but for some strange reason, anything that was added, I think after 2011, is not available online for some reason. So you have to put in a request in for them to see the document. But everything we have, Michelle, wonderful lady, she's done extensive research gathering all the documentation, and she's actually very willing to share it. So her website, her number's on the website. So if you want to call her or just shoot her an email, she would send over any documentation you have questions on.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we got two. I'll take one at a time.
I have a question about the excavation site that you're working on. Is that close to the fort or part of the fort?
Yes, actually, I would pull up the picture again, but if you are standing in the parking lot, the cisterns that are off in that grassy field next to the parking lot, yes, it's back there somewhere. There you go. To the left of where I'm standing in this photo would have been where that excavation took place. For the mechanics' quarters, the laborers' quarters are out by the north pier, which is about a quarter mile to the north.
And the excavation is still ongoing?
It's suspended for right now. We have a lot of information to get through.
Can visitors go there?
Sure, absolutely. They're covered up now, so there's not much to look at but grass, but you're welcome to go out there.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
I was looking at the locally sourced, little graphic on the right, the locally sourced foods.
Yes. That came from the Naval Yard in Pensacola.
Were they eating alligators yet?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't found any alligator yet. Too bad.
I have a question for you too, Dana. On the artifacts that you brought up and that Laura brought up, are they going to the archaeological storage facility at Georgia Southern? Are they going to be part of the collections there?
Right now, I think they're intended to join the rest of the collection at the Southeastern Archaeological Center
Okay.
as part of the National Park Service.
So where is it located?
Tallahassee.
Tallahassee. Okay. That makes sense.
Anyone else? Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. It's been great. We've learned a lot, and I appreciate it. And I would ask those of you who haven't already to fill out our program survey. We appreciate the feedback at the archives.